Tangible value is something you cannot measure. It's that emotional connection with your consumer that inspires them to pay more for what you're selling than a competitor with similar ingredients and features as you.
Steph, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to do this today.
Hey Brian, thanks so much for having me on your channel. I'm really excited.
Well, we're talking about building intangible value through branding. Now, before we get into that, maybe just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Stephanie Zhuang. I've been in the CPG category working in brand management for the past 15 years. Over the last 5 years, I've been in the wellness space, focusing on supplements and nutrition. And it's such an exciting space and kind of where my heart is at. Recently, over the last couple of months, I decided to start on my own, starting an agency called Title Brand Management. What I learned working with smaller brands is that a lot of them can benefit from the frameworks from brand management, and a lot of them actually can't access it that readily, especially from a full-time brand manager or brand management professional. And to break that down, I started Title Brand Management for them to be able to access the service on an ad hoc basis, on a retainer basis. So they get the expertise and knowledge, but not having to commit to a full brand team or somebody really senior on staff all the time, which sometimes is not viable. Yeah, so that's the concept for the agency. And yeah, I'm super excited to meet new founders, excited to work with startup emerging brands, and building their story together.
That's great. Fantastic. What a journey. And I feel like we'll probably connect maybe later again in the future. I know that there are a lot of people in this space looking for exactly that type of service. I get questions all the time, like who do you know from a branding standpoint, marketing standpoint? So if that's something that you can help, I'm pretty sure we'll be crossing paths quite often in the future.
These days, it's easier than ever for somebody to decide to launch a brand, launch a product into the marketplace, right? Technology has enabled people to be able to do that more accessibly and easily than ever before. So with that lower barrier to entry, you have so many brands entering at every moment. And a lot of those people will launch and say, hey, I have these ingredients in there. You put a product out there and you're in business. So brand building will really help differentiate you from other companies, people in the market, because at the end of the day, your formulas can be copied, your ingredients can be copied, even if you have a competitive advantage for 6 months on a striking new ingredient, somebody's going to come in very quickly, especially if you're successful, and copy that. And there's really no kind of guardrails against that unless you build your own brand. That is something distinct to you. That is your story. That is your personality, tone of voice, and character that somebody cannot easily replicate. So for me, that's really the key reasons why you want to establish and build your brand right up front.
Yeah, that whole copying idea, that makes sense, and we've seen it in the CPG space, right? You put your product into a Whole Foods, and then they come up with a Whole Foods version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I hear you on the branding component. And now, obviously, we're talking about intangible brand value. So what does that mean?
Yeah, intangible brand value is something that you can't empirically measure easily. So if you think about ingredients and features, again, you can compare yourself to another brand in the market. You can start adding or attributing value to, okay, this ingredient could potentially cost this much. That feature could potentially cost that much. But the intangible value is something you cannot measure. It's that emotional connection with your consumer that inspires them to pay more for what you're selling than a competitor with similar ingredients and features as you. So the best example of intangible value in a category that is really good at doing this is fashion, especially luxury fashion. If you think about a Chanel purse, an Hermes purse, the components of that purse, even labor, is not more than a couple of $1,000s. Yet those brands are able to sell their products for tens of thousands of dollars. So that margin that is beyond the ingredients, the labor, all the overhead costs, that's intangible value. And that's what you want to build and create, because ultimately it'll help your margin, it'll make you more competitive, it'll lock in your competitive advantage in the long term. And everybody wants bigger margins these days.
Yeah, just a little bit. So how would you go about creating that? What would a startup consider or want to implement at this point?
Yeah, in terms of how to start building that, I would go back to the very core of what are you bringing onto the market that is not currently there? And I don't mean ingredients or features or tangible benefits, right? Think about what your story is that you want to tell to the market. How does that connect with your core consumer that makes them emotionally engage with you and then want to experience and have that experience with you further? The second piece is design is super important. A lot in marketing, there's a lot of copy and talk in marketing, but at the end of the day, consumers don't have a ton of time to go through pages and pages and listen to your story. So that show and versus tell component is super important. So in a split second, can they see your packaging? Can they see your branding and really feel attached and attracted to you? Again, versus another brand. And does that design help tell the story of ultimately what your purpose is in this market? So those are two key factors. Another factor is product experience, right? So how do you differentiate yourself and build that story from an experience standpoint? Packaging is one experience, but also if you're a D2C brand, instead of shipping yourself in a brown box, which, is more cost efficient, but if you want to build that intangible value in an overall customer experience, do you put that in a more beautiful box with a note inside so your customer feels special? That and also, if your competitors are not doing that, that again creates that intangible value for your brand specifically. So there's many other areas to be able to build that, but it's all about leaning into the emotional connection versus more that rational, functional ingredient to your brand.
Yeah, that's a good point. I find that when entrepreneurs starting a supplement brand or a food brand, the first thing they lean towards is, oh, this can help with inflammation, or this ingredient is known to do X, Y, Z. But we're limited to in saying what we can say from that front. But then anyone else can say the exact same thing. So I hear you on the emotional side. Is there any example of an emotional connection story or something that you've seen that's been done in the marketplace? You hinted about fashion, but anything else in the food or another industry?
Yeah, and I think a couple of good examples within the supplement space that I've seen is one of them is AG1. Obviously, everybody talks about that brand, and because they've been able to position themselves as such a premium player. The other similar brand is Seed Probiotics too, right? So those are both of those brands. Yes, obviously AG1 has so many ingredients in there, so there is a tangible value to it. But I think when you look at the branding, when you look at who speaks and backs their brand and endorses the brand, and the influencers they choose, they all create this very premium aesthetic, and they feature a lot of people who are key opinion leaders who are very aspirational to promote the brand, to create that, again, intangible value to say, okay, the people who are taking this product look like this. I also want to look or feel like this. And therefore, I think if I take AG1, then I will get there. Seed is another brand who creates and builds romance and story around something that's quite simple, which is a probiotic, right? There's so many probiotics out there in the market, but they've been able to build out the story specifically around their probiotics to make it special. Yes, I'm sure there is something special about the technology, but the marketing aspect blows that up infinitely more than what logically and again tangibly that ingredient or process would be. So I think from that perspective, again, when you look at the branding, it's very sleek, it's very modern, it has a scientific hook to it as well. Those are all attributes that they specifically strategically build into the brand to make you feel like this is not just your run of the mill probiotic pill. Even when you look at their photography, it's so beautiful, right? When we think of supplements, a lot of the times it's just, you know, pill bottles and capsules, and that's not sexy. But Seed has made the probiotic capsule sexy. And I think that's one important factor for those launching into the supplement space, that if you want to build that sort of emotional connection and engagement, invest in those more aesthetics and aspirational aspect to your brand.
And you talked about AG1 and this unboxing experience, and we all know about that experience with AG1. And you got the influencers or the product reviewers talking about it all the time. And as you're going through some of the examples, and I know we're using brands that are fairly well known, fairly well established, how would that translate to a smaller startup with a limited budget? What could that look like? I know it's a very different scenario, and they can't have the influencers, the large influencers, but what can a small brand do?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually something that I came across more recently. They are this snacking brand, so it's sour fruits, right? It's super simple. It's like a candy. They're not like a huge brand by any means, but they just came out from nowhere. So essentially, I can send a picture for you to include, but um, they're just sour fruit candies. And what they did was they had that similar unboxing experience, right? You don't have to hire a huge PR agency to do that for you. I think it's just about intentional design. There's so many tools now in the marketing space to make that accessible. Canva is a great tool to help you build designs if you don't have money to hire a designer. They make it very accessible and easy to use. There's tons of printing services where you can print a small limited run of really professional looking boxes that you can send out to influencers. We're on social media all the time. If you see an influencer that you really like in your feed and you're like, hey, you would be a really great fit for my brand to talk about my brand, just DM them and reach out. You never know how they respond, and send them these well curated, well designed gift kits, right? It's all about intention and not so much about money. Obviously, big budgets will get you something that looks really good, but a lot of the times these agencies really work to take things off your plate, right? They'll charge you the high amounts of money so you don't have to do that yourself. But again, if you're starting out, you can do that yourself. And there's tons of tools out there to help you do that more accessibly these days. So I think it's about intention. And then back to that candy brand story. So they created these really cute curated box, personalized the gifts to each of these influencers, send them the gifts. These influencers were blown away. I don't even know how much or if any they paid these folks, but as a smaller brand, you can get away with a little bit of goodwill, just sharing your story. Hey, I'm a startup founder. This is why I'm doing this. I have a lot of passion, love your content. Can I just send you something? And again, build that relationship and emotional connections with the influencers. And they could be willing to just post about you organically because the package that you sent to them was so creative and blew them away, right? And again, that's just how you build. It's a lot of elbow grease, I think, in the beginning, but again, you're building something that's really worthwhile to you, and for you to have that ownership and experience early on is also very valuable. So it's definitely doable without the large budgets. It's just creativity, elbow grease, grit, and being authentic and sharing your story.
Yeah, that last point with regards to sharing your story, that emotional connection, I think the brand needs to really understand what their origin story is, what their emotional hook is.
Hmm.
And once you, at least with one client, they really understood that, and they were able to reach out to influencers that had a much larger audience. But because that influencer really connected with that story, it was, the connection made sense, the partnership made sense, and they did do a deal, and it's definitely working very well for them. But it all starts with what does the brand stand for? What do they believe in? And I think in that example, it was a conservative, stay-at-home mom type brand. They really
Mm.
believed in the value and power of that, which makes sense. And then it helped them niche down to the right influencers, the right podcasters. So I hear you. Really good advice there. How would a startup brand differentiate their brand from others? Now, this is a common question I get all the time. Love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the authenticity, right? The great part of startup brands and founders is they have a very clear reason why they got into this business. So share that story. You might want to touch up that story a little bit, to airbrush it a little bit, but at the end of the day, you're the starting point. You're the spark, right? So when I worked for big brands, when we think about innovation or launching a brand, you're looking at things that are from a 10,000 foot. We're looking at data, we're looking at trends, but it doesn't necessarily come from the heart, right? So you're piecing together a lot of things in a methodical way. It's engineered, it's scientific, but it doesn't necessarily have the heart. Where I think founders and startups have the advantage is that you have the heart and the passion and the emotional reason behind what you're doing. So leverage that as a starting point and build your story from there. And again, put in the effort of building that customer experience from the start. So just find ways to differentiate yourself from the big guys, right? You know, the big guys aren't going to be taking that extra step to insert a welcome card to build that relationship with people from early on. So that's an opening for you and a competitive advantage. Sometimes a lot of folks do it for the money. They get into it because they think they can make a quick buck. So they cut corners, right? Whereas I think if you start with intention, the effort, and really think through how you are coming across to your potential customer, that can put you ahead of a lot of people, even the big guys from the get-go. So that's one piece. The other piece is don't be afraid to show personality, especially in the supplement space. It's very sterile. It's not really the most enjoyable category, although these days it's evolving. But again, when you're standing in front of pills and powders all the time, a lot of it is sterile, scientific, intimidating, and not enjoyable. So, how do you bring warmth and personality to the space? Because at the end of the day, the customers you're serving want to feel better. They're obviously there for a reason. So they want to feel better, whether or not they're in a challenging spot or they want to maintain. They just want better. So how do you not only physically be able to provide that to them, but also in a more emotionally engaging way as well?
Yeah, when you talk about personality, what could that look like? I'm thinking just the way you speak, like the content, how you write the content on the label
Yeah.
or on the advertising. Anything I'm missing there?
Yeah, written copy is definitely a great way to show your personality, tone of voice. I think a great example of a brand that does that very well is Oatly. They have a very distinct tone of voice, a little bit irreverent even. I think as a new entry, a smaller player into the category, you can lean a bit more to the daring and bold side because you need that to break through. Um, the bigger brands will be generic, right? Because they're serving such a massive audience that they can't take the risk of being more focused and direct. Whereas a smaller brand coming in, looking at a different angle, and you can experiment a bit more with that aspect. So, tone of voice is definitely important. I think visually as well, right? Again, you go to the supplements aisle, it's a sea of white bottles. There are pops of colors coming in now. So that's also a way for you to build that differentiation, um, and show your personality instead of a white sterile bottle. Do you do something edgy like, black and liquid death, right? Great example, revolutionizing the water category. They came in with like a Harley Davidson rocker feel. So that's also a great way to show your personality and character. And like I said before, a lot of the times consumers won't have the attention span or time to go through your whole brand story. They'll quickly look at something and make a determination about you, right? That first impression, show, don't tell. So I think visuals have a really strong impact on how you come across and how you showcase your brand personality.
Love it. How can people work with you and what kind of services do you provide?
Sure. Yeah. So the services I provide, obviously, there's advisory service. So some of the information that I've been providing, if you're a brand starting up and, want to do this on your own, if you want an hour with me, on a weekly basis or whatever cadence you're after. That's something that's available. I talked about research. That's something very specific. So even though you have access to these platforms, it is a specific skill to be able to write a quality survey questionnaire. You also have to understand from the 60-page document that you can get from Mintel about your category, what things specifically to look for. So I can help you navigate through all of the overwhelming information that could come your way when you do access that. So I can help you with market research, consumer target research, and help you build the strategies and brand stories to link all of them together. The one thing I do say that differentiate what I'm doing versus other marketing agencies out there is, marketing agencies specifically most of the marketing agencies specifically focus on brand building, so creative aesthetic and brand story. So that's available out there. There's also performance marketing agencies to help you get your story out once you've established that. The thing how I work differently is, yes, I do all of that, but I also link that to your product. So does your product also echo this brand? Does your product also echo your brand promise? Is there a way you can build certain attributes in the product that makes it more marketable once you do go to market with a marketing campaign? So is there a hook that you can add into your product that would make your content more interesting or make an influencer more interested in featuring your content or your product in their content? So linking that together. Also making sure the features and attributes in your product links with who you're talking to specifically. Sometimes with supplements, you get very knee deep in formulations and you lose sight of, okay, does this consumer care about this ingredient? Does this consumer really want this benefit? And sometimes less is more. So how do you also prioritize what you're telling that consumer, even though your product can be like a Swiss Army tool? So linking the product. And then also lastly, placement, sales strategy. Where you place your product or where you sell your product, when I say placement, has a very close relationship with how you want to market your product. For example, if you just want to be a D2C brand, that's one stream of or marketing strategy. If you want to be a D2C and Amazon, that's something else. Obviously, if you want to go to retail, that's another different way a marketing strategy comes into play. So for me, I link together all the 4 Ps to make sure everything works holistically and cohesively to, 2 plus 2 equals 5 versus just managing individual pieces. So that's my service. Essentially, I can help you through strategy. I can help you through insights digging, as well as execution. A lot of the times, clients work with agencies and they're kind of like, hey, agency, make this happen for me. They give them a really, really wide brief and the agency's like, okay, I'll make something up and see what you say. So, and then, you get the work back and it's not what you're expecting. So helping manage those relationships with agencies that you work with to get the most out of them. So you're not churning with them and acquiring all these billable hours when, if you had a tighter brief and you kind of work with them in an efficient way, it would ultimately help you save some costs there as well.
That's
So I'm
great.
I'm kind of your right hand.
Yeah, that's how I'm viewing this. You're not just providing like the typical services, but you're also acting like a mentor, as a guide them through the whole process, which I know a lot of people are seeking. They want that. So that's great. We'll link your website in the description down below, maybe your email if you're open to that.
Sure.
Steph, thank you so much for being here. I learned a lot today. I know the viewers have. Thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Thanks so much, Brian. Looking forward
Uh,
to working with you.
Likewise. Cheers.